Reclaim the Game, a European-wide fans and campaign to talk about sports washing, nation-state ownership of football clubs, and of course the human rights issues. We have a few speakers. We've got two main speakers. We're going to have Areej, who will explain her situation, who's a Saudi human rights activist. And the first speaker is Stanis Elsborg, who has written an excellent report, which we all recommend to read, about the extent of Saudi state investment in sports, not just in football. So I think we should start the meeting, and then people can come later on. So Stanis, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me, and huge applause for the group that has set up this meeting, and not least for inviting me as a speaker. Just very briefly about who I am. My name is Stanis Elsborg, and I work for an organization called Play the Game. It's an initiative that has been here since 1997, and we have tried to raise some of the more darker sides of sport at our conference. We have hosted 12 conferences since 1997 about doping, match fixing, corruption, abuse, and of course also in the last 10-15 years about sports washing, and very recently, of course, much about Saudi Arabia and how they are using sport for political purposes. For many years, Play the Game was called the home for the homeless questions in sport because no one really wanted to talk about the darker side. So I really applaud initiatives like this. We don't see them very often. We rarely see fans engage in this kind of debate. I want to stress very clearly that when I speak about Saudi Arabia in general, and when I say Saudi Arabia, I mean the state of Saudi Arabia. I mean a very, very little group of people which is headed by Mohammed bin Salman. I'm not talking about the general population of Saudi Arabia. I'm not talking about women and men from Saudi Arabia. Life of Saudi Arabia with Mohammed bin Salman, who is spearheading the project and Saudi Arabia's sports strategy. But much has been said about Mohammed bin Salman through the last many, many years. And what we wanted to show with our research was to show a little bit more about the next layer of people who are in this sports strategy for them. If you want to, you can go and see the project on our website. You can also download our data for free. It's just an Excel file where you can see all the mapped sponsorships, and you can see all the mapped people behind this sports strategy. What I want to highlight today is some of the core findings from our research. And of course, we were interested to see how invested was the Public Investment Fund, the owner of Newcastle United. I know that many fans of Newcastle United, which I also very often meet in my mail box, is not very fond of me saying that it is the state of Saudi Arabia who owns the club. But I will talk with facts, and what I mean is that it is the state of Saudi Arabia who is behind Newcastle United. It is the Public Investment Fund where the chairman is Mohammed bin Salman. They are the owner of Newcastle United. And one of the other peoples I will highlight in a minute is Areej Al-Sadhan, who is the chairman of Newcastle United. When we looked at the sponsorships, beforehand we knew that the Public Investment Fund were very engaged in the sporting world. But what surprised us was actually that out of the more than 300 sponsorships, actually the precise number is 323 sponsorships into the world of sport. The Public Investment Fund is behind 140 of them. That's either by a direct sponsorships directly from the Public Investment Funds, as the one we see into Newcastle United, but it can also be through a sub-entity or a sister company, which they engage very much into the world of sport. And all of you people who follow Newcastle United will know plenty of them. One of them is just in the middle of your shirt. It's the SELA, which is owned by the Public Investment Fund. There's also another logo on your shirt, which is Noon. It's on the sleeve, I believe, if I remember Newcastle's kit exactly. And that is also owned by the Public Investment Fund. So they engage very, very many of these sub-entities into the world of sport. And of course, they also engage other huge companies, Aramco being the other highlight from our research, which is behind more than 20 sponsorships, 26 to be exact. What I want to tell you just very briefly about, because I only have 10 to 15 minutes, is that the people behind this sports strategy, there is, of course, many people behind it. But some of the most important is, of course, Yasir Al-Rumayyan, who is a very, very central part of their sports strategy. We saw some similar strategy when we looked at Qatar, where Nasser Al-Khelaifi, the president of another big European football club, Paris Saint-Germain, was also the front figure of their sports strategy for many, many years. It seems that Yasir Al-Rumayyan, they tried to copy that strategy and placing Yasir Al-Rumayyan as their front figure. He is not only the chairman of Newcastle United, he is also the chairman of Aramco. He is the governor of the Public Investment Fund. He is also a part of the big project NEOM. He's a board member of several big companies like the Red Sea Global, like Russian, and he's also the chairman of Gulf Saudi. He's a board member of Saudi Arabia's Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And the importance of that is that in Saudi Arabia, there's no difference between being a part of the political life or the sporting life. That's how we see it in these autocratic regimes. They know no distinction between sports and politics. So Yasir Al-Rumayyan can travel all around the world, and in 1 second he can be a representative of Newcastle United, or he can be a representative of Gulf Saudi, and in a split second he can meet with people on golf course in the United States with Donald Trump, and he can switch roles in a second to be one of the most economical, powerful men in the whole world, as the chairman of Aramco and as the governor of the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. And that means that he has a power making decision. He has a decision-making power that we don't see in that many officials into the sports world. And that's why Saudi Arabia has so much power into the world of sport, is because they engage these very influential people from their political life into the world of sport. Another mentionable figure from Saudi Arabia is Princess Rima, who of course is a woman, and I will leave others with much more knowledge into the human rights issues in Saudi Arabia to discuss equality between men and women. But of course, we all know a little bit about the stories that women do not have nearly the same possibilities that men have in Saudi Arabia. And Princess Rima is a board member of the Saudi Arabian Olympic and Paralympic Committee, but she is also a member of the International Olympic Committee, one of the most important, if not the most important, sports federation or organizations in the world. And importantly, if we have to talk about Princess Rima, is that she is also the ambassador in Saudi Arabia's ambassador in the United States. So she can also play different roles. She can be a politician. She can be a woman signaling female empowerment for the regime in Saudi Arabia, and she can also represent the sporting life in Saudi Arabia. And this is what they do. And the last one I want to mention is the chairman of Visit Saudi, or the Minister of Tourism, Al-Khatib from Saudi Arabia, who has a very, very central role in making a very picturesque image about Saudi Arabia to the world, where we don't talk about human rights issues in Saudi Arabia, where we don't talk about all the bad stuff that happens in the country, but where we talk about Saudi Arabia as a paradise for people and tourists to come to and to experience the country themselves. And visit Saudi. I think most of the people who follow world sport will know them. They have sponsored very, very many sports throughout the last couple of years, like the Dakar Rally, like the match between Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou. They sponsor the Indian Premier League in cricket. They have a huge sponsorships with the Asian Football Confederation. They sponsor La Liga in Spain. And, of course, they have managed to convince maybe the most famous, maybe the best, we can discuss that, football player throughout history, Lionel Messi, to be Saudi Arabia's tourism ambassador. So once again, it just illustrates a little glimpse of how Saudi Arabia uses sport. They use their political life, they use their sponsorships, companies to engage in world of sport, and they do this not only because of the very, very famous word sportswashing, to make a picturesque image of themselves. They use it because they want to become a geopolitical powerhouse, just like the United States and China. And they use it because they want to expand their diplomatic relations in all countries all over the world. And they want to create new networks and new trade deals for the regime of Saudi Arabia. Thanks for listening.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Stanis. I'm going to hand over now to Jamie from ITL Football, who's going to chair the meeting. Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Stanis. So, hello, everyone. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties we had briefly early. I'm not quite sure what's going on with Spaces tonight, but it's done and done now. Yeah, thank you, Stanis, for just opening up there. That's been really insightful and a really fascinating opening 10-15 minutes. Just want to give you a quick couple of backgrounds on Reclaim the Game. I just want to run over the mission statement overall, with just a few key factors. Number one, legislation in Europe on ownership of football clubs for 2034. Now, obviously, it's not fully confirmed yet, but Saudi Arabia look more than likely than anyone to be getting that World Cup. That's wrong. We don't want nation states to be allowed to own football clubs. We want to keep the historical values of these football clubs, and that fans must be involved throughout their football clubs. And that is the most fundamental, important thing. Secondly, a reinvention of the global organisation such as FIFA. We all know, either personal opinions or what's been proven in gone by documentaries, the corruption at the top level and all the way down member associations of FIFA and UEFA. There's been a number of cases of corruption and vote rigging at top levels. For the sake of future football as a sport and for the people, it's a money-making plaything, and that has to fundamentally change. And thirdly, opposition to the proposed World Cup in Saudi Arabia. Human rights records, abusing dictatorships cannot be allowed in football to sports wash their way through. And like Stanis just said, to make it a geopolitical power by the means of putting the walls over people's eyes. And this is hopefully a nice standpoint that we can look to forward and build, get people on board with that. So Stanis opening up fantastically. We've got 3 or 4 more speakers left to go. I'm going to there's a change.org position. I'm going to link in the chat just below now. If you could please sign that and please join that, that would be fantastic. I'm going to hand you over now to Areej to give her say. We've got about 10-15 minutes per speaker. So Areej, whenever you're ready, feel free.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much to John and all the group who are behind organizing this space. It's very important to discuss the sport washing and what's going on really, why the sudden interest and focus on investing in sports by the Saudi officials and the Saudi government. I also want to thank Stanis for the extensive, important research that he's conducted. It's very informative. It is actually shedding a light on what's going on behind the scenes, who are the real players driving all this sport washing. And I hope I can shed the light on the human rights aspect by sharing our personal story, what happened to my brother, what happened to in terms of his case. And just to let you know, basically, our story is just one of many, many out there, hundreds out there who are suffering like us, if not worse, on different levels and degrees. And it's the same, basically almost the same story and the same suffering repeated over and over. These human rights abuses have been increasing since NPS came to power. And as the sport washing and the investment in sports is increasing, the human rights abuses are increasing as well. So I'm going to start by sharing what happened to my brother. So in 2018, my brother was kidnapped from his place of work at the Red Crescent office in Riyadh by the Saudi secret police. So they showed up without a warrant and they took him, they escorted him out. And from that moment, we weren't able to communicate with him. He was basically disappeared for an entire 2 years before we were able to get any news from him. So when he was kidnapped that day, they took away his phone, they took away his car, and we were completely left in the dark. The only reason, or the only way for us to let us to find out that he was kidnapped is because my brother stayed in touch with us every single day. He always contacted us. We live in the United States and my brother works in Saudi Arabia. So he always called my mom on a daily basis. He stayed in touch with me and the rest of the family. He always sends messages and check on us. So that's how we found out, because the phone calls weren't going through, the messages weren't going through. So it clearly was something not normal, because my brother is very communicative. He always stays in touch with us. So the days went by and we're like really scared and worried, and we're trying to reach out to his friends, family in Saudi Arabia, like everyone who knows him, and nobody knows anything. Like nobody know where he went or where he disappeared, until his co-workers found our contact and reached out to my family in Riyadh to let them know that he was actually taken by the secret police from his office where he worked. And from that moment, my family continued to reach out to the Saudi secret police to ask them about my brother, and they kept denying any knowledge for an entire month before finally a clerk have confirmed that they had him in the system and that he is under investigation, and that's all they can tell us. They refused to give us any additional information, where he was kept, how is his health, if we can contact him, and after that, my family have filed a lot of requests for visitation or to get a phone call, and they all get ignored or denied. That continued for an entire 2 years before he was finally allowed to make a 1-minute call. And that 1-minute call happened only because of international pressure. And the first year, I didn't go public until an entire year went by, after we tried everything from internal channels, trying to reach out to the Saudi government in all the channels that we are aware of, from faxes, phone calls. My family in Riyadh have tried every possible channel to reach out, and we were just completely kept in the dark. So after I decided to actually go public, and the main reason actually I went public, because not only we weren't getting any information about my brother, but also I was receiving information from witnesses that my brother was being brutally tortured. And it wasn't just one witness or two, it was multiple. So obviously there was actually, the torture was real. It was happening. And the last, message that really, drove me to decide, okay, I'm going to just go public. I cannot wait. I cannot just continue to be silent, because this is really, really getting bad. The witness told me that my brother may die from torture. So that's when I decided, okay, this is it. I'm going to have just to go public and, bring my brother's case out there and try to seek help. So I've reached out to all the different human rights organizations I can reach out to the United Nations. And I started, sharing our story on social media, mainly on Twitter. And that pressure or that visibility have created the amount of pressure from human rights organizations and world leaders and governments to, continuously ask about my brother. And finally, we got a 1-minute phone call after 2 years where we found out that he was kept in the Al-Higher prison, which is a notorious political prison in Saudi Arabia, well known, where political prisoners are kept. Then after that, he went into enforced disappearance again for another year. And after 3 years of enforced disappearance, after 3 years of being, unlawfully detained without any charge, he was brought to a secret sham trial. And again, this was because of and also continued international pressure. So he was brought to this secret sham trial and got sentenced to 20 years imprisonment, followed by 20 years travel ban, based on just freedom of speech, just for tweeting. And unfortunately, although he filed the appeal was the same way. They upheld the sentence, and the day where they upheld the sentence was actually within 24 hours when the Newcastle United deal was announced, that the Saudi government or the Saudi officials have got the Newcastle deal, publicly have announced it. So, and it was the same week of Jamal Khashoggi's murder anniversary, the third anniversary of his, unfortunately, murder. So obviously the timing is really astonishing, that it's, to me, because it's so personal, what our suffering, what we're going through, it was a clear indication that this is to distract our effort to get the international attention to what's going on to my brother's case. I was tweeting on daily basis on what's going on, with the secret hearings, all the updates that are with my brother's case. So clearly that, the coincidence is just, shocking. There are many different cases and examples where there's, obviously, as the human rights abuses are increasing, we hear, for example, the beheading of minors, beheading of innocent people, mass beheading, and that at the same time we hear about news that the Saudi government have, obviously established a certain deal with sports stars or celebrity stars or entertainment events. So it's clearly to basically whitewash or just, distract the world from what's going on in terms of human rights. There are different cases where, other victims who are suffering, like my brother, for example, Salma Shihab, went almost very similar to what my brother is going through. She was sentenced to 27 years imprisonment. Noor Al-Qahtani, she was sentenced to 45 years imprisonment. And it's all based on posting online, freedom, just posting tweets or criticizing issues in the country, criticizing issues related to human rights, to women's rights, or even just following other activists or just retweeting. Some of the cases are imprisoned just, for retweeting. So unfortunately, the situation is really bad when it comes to human rights in Saudi Arabia. People are completely silenced. The crackdown on freedom of speech have been the worst than any time before. As of today, we haven't heard my brother now for over 2 years, 2 years and 2 months since we last heard anything about my brother. So now he is also under enforced disappearance. So this enforced disappearance have been continuous. And we don't know what's going on. Like when there's an enforced disappearance, usually that means the victim could be tortured, could be abused. In some cases, could be murdered, and there is no way to check on them or to protect their rights. So unfortunately, there is no real laws in the country where you can enforce human rights or protection of people's rights. And when you hear about reforms, for example, Saudi Arabia have been investing so much to try to paint this image that there is reform and modernization. Unfortunately, it's not. It's just a whitewash from the outside to show the world, look, we have entertainment, we have sports, but in the reality, there's the fundamental rights of people are not protected. There is no real institutions or rule of law to protect, fundamental rights and respect to people's dignity. So these are not really modernization. Beheading minors is not modernization. Torturing people, imprisoning them, disappearing them is not modernization. Cracking on people, silencing people for over tweets or just posting on social media, asking about women's rights or advocating for women's rights or human rights or just criticizing certain issues like unemployment in the country. This is not modernization. Modernization is when you allow people to take part to protect their rights, to protect their fundamental rights and respect to their dignity. So last year, the United Nations have actually issued a decision that my brother is arbitrarily detained and called for his immediate and unconditional release. And unfortunately, my brother continued to be forcibly disappeared, and there is no response at all from the Saudi officials on my brother's situation, or not even allowing us to have any communication at all. All requests to get any calls or visits are either ignored or denied. So their situation is continuous. Human rights abuses are continuing to worsen in Saudi Arabia. The more there's sport washing and focus on entertainment and sports, investing in sports, the more the victims in Saudi Arabia are, suffering in silence, are not, obviously their stories are being diluted and nobody, the focus will be what the Saudi government is aiming for is to have the focus to shift from human rights abuses to entertainment and sports events. So instead of people thinking about Jamal Khashoggi, for example, or the cases of mass beheading, or the cases of disappearance and torture, like my brother's case and many other cases, they'll be thinking about Cristiano Ronaldo, or about entertainment and about their favorite stars. So I could talk forever, but this is just in summary what is going on. And I hope our story can just give you a glimpse of light of what is going on really on the ground in terms of human rights abuses. Again, this is just our story, and there are many, many others like us who are suffering in silence. A lot of them cannot even speak publicly about their cases. A lot of families are being threatened. They cannot really talk publicly about their cases. Again, thank you so much for hosting this space, and I'm going to pass it back to John.
Jamie.
That's all good. Areej, thank you very much for being so open and sharing your story there. We do our thoughts and sympathies, obviously, with you, and we hope that you get some news and some contact and as soon as possible, and our support is there for you, and that is the reality of Saudi Arabia. That is the reality of the life behind the shield, if you like, of clubs like Newcastle United. So our thoughts with you, Areej, and hopefully we can hear from your brother very soon. I think you put a link in your Twitter at freesudan.com. I'll put a link in this space below if anyone wants to check out and read more and hand more support in that story. Next up, John, it's yourself next. We did a podcast a month ago, didn't we? Where we had a lovely conversation, which went down really well with Newcastle United fans, didn't it? But now you feel free to take the floor. It is your turn. Obviously, we'll just run you in. Your club are owned by Public Investment Fund. I'm sure you go into much more detail as to what exactly all that means for Newcastle United.
Okay, thanks very much, Jamie. Well, what I want to do is just to tell a little bit of a story about the journey that our campaign has been on, why we got started and why we're sort of reaching out to people throughout Europe and, in fact, the world about this issue. because it was on October the 7th, 2021, when Mike Ashley sold the club to the Saudi state, to the supposedly to the PIF. There's a lot of celebration in the streets outside St James's Park, and propaganda machine went into action. I think the Saudi state has paid an American PR firm almost $1 million, and they've been preparing for this for a long time. The first propaganda wave that they had was that the PIF had nothing to do with the Saudi state. Remember 2 years ago, they said, it's separate. It's just like, Manchester United's not owned by Abu Dhabi. Sorry, Manchester City is not owned by Abu Dhabi. But 2 years down the line, no one denies that the Saudi state owns Newcastle United, our club. And also they said sports washing is just made up. It's completely made up phenomenon by journalists. And a lot of, unfortunately, Newcastle fans spent their time attacking journalists for writing articles about sports washing. But what's happened since 2021? We've had the second strip of Newcastle United is the same colour as the Falcons, the Saudi Falcons, the national team. And outrageously, the Saudi state managed to get two internationals at St James's Park, our stadium, against Costa Rica and South Korea. So there's been a massive propaganda campaign to make this possible. Now, we decided, we got together. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's very easy on social media. But I think we had a few of us who got together at first sort of said, we realised the implications of another state taking over a Premier League club, and especially this bloody dictatorship, which other people have got into the crimes of the state. And we said, our region, Tyneside, has got a good tradition of solidarity, good working class traditions of trade unions and democracy, and we shouldn't allow the Saudi state, the Saudi dictatorship, to use our club for soft power and for sports washing purposes. And it basically, when we started, we felt we were like very, very small people in the foothills of the Himalayas, but we've managed to actually get our voice through a lot of hard work, get our voice heard. And I think it's important not to underestimate the importance of this meeting, because what I think we're saying is that you can start with a small number of people, but if your ideas and if your cause is right, then you'll get support. Now, we've organised various things, and always very moved and honoured when we hear testimony from people like Areej and what happened to her brother. But one of the things that we decided was that we were going to say the names of Salma Al-Shabaab, Noura Al-Qahtani, and those 9 young boys on death row in Saudi Arabia, arrested when they were children, or arrested for crimes committed supposedly when they were children. And we decided we were going to say their names and on Tyneside. Now, one of the first protests that we had was in collaboration with the Saudi Human Rights Group based in Berlin, and we got photographs and posters and a banner of these 9 young guys, and we went to the Chelsea match and we stood outside. And this shows you what I'm going to say to you now is how sensitive the Saudi state is, because when we announced that we were going to do this this protest, we got abuse and we got threats, and those threats came from Riyadh. They came from the in inverted commas, the Centre Against Terrorism in Riyadh, and it was actually reported in the national press in the UK that they actually targeted people like us who said the truth. And one of the things that really sort of motivated us to keep going is when we said the names Salma Al-Shabaab, Noura Al-Qahtani, and these 9 young lads, people were coming up and say on social media and say, but they're terrorists. Now, some of that was coming from Riyadh, but unfortunately, some Newcastle fans were repeating that. And so we said, look, there's no way that we can allow that sort of sports washing and that sort of abuse to continue. So it's a battle for hearts and minds. We've held various protests, and one of the things that we always say to our fellow fans who disagree with us, but we always say is that MPs, councillors on Tyneside, but also the fanzine editors and the people who, around the official fan groups, that they should stick to their promises that they made before the takeover. And what were those promises? A lot of these politicians, local councillors and fanzine editors and fan groups are on record as saying that the takeover wouldn't stop them talking about human rights. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. And it's to be honest, we are one of the few sort of groups that regularly raises it. And why is that? Now, this year in September, we invited Lina Alathul, who people might know, whose sister is imprisoned in Saudi Arabia, and she's a Saudi human rights advocate as well. And we invited her to Newcastle to do a tour, and it was very striking the effect that it had, because we said that the voices of people like Saudi human rights activists, the victims, need to be heard on Tyneside. And when we were going around Tyneside doing interviews on the radio and on the TV as well, you could see that the journalists were shocked by the testing, just like what we've just heard before, that these atrocities really and these massive human rights abuses are happening to real people, And Lena made the point, because we tried to get interviews with local councillors and politicians. She made the point that only 2 or 3 councillors agreed to meet, that if she'd had been there 4 years ago, there would have been a lot of meetings. And so one of the implications that we have to look at, sports washing is just not just about football. It's also about basic democracy. Lena said, basically, the Saudi, not the Saudi state, but the Saudi royal family, the Saudi dictatorship, has bought the silence with £500 million. That's what it's cost them, and they've managed to shut people up about human rights. So this idea that sports washing doesn't exist is a lie. We know it exists. Now, we've done other things. We did a protest outside the Saudi internationals, and we forced the council to make a statement, because the Newcastle Stadium is on the ground owned by the council, and the council said that they stood for that they supported human rights. But also, our protest outside the Costa Rica match got a lot of publicity, and we've had 3 editions of our fanzine. We've got a website which we direct everyone to. And also the petitions against nation-state ownership of football clubs. But the final point I wanted to make is why we sort of thought it was a good idea to reach out to fans across Europe, is because as we've been campaigning, we've been contacted by football magazines in Germany, France, Holland, and also football. Some of the people you're going to hear speaking in a moment. And what we realise is one of the things that fans say in Newcastle is, you have to understand how Newcastle is. It's a little bit of a bubble. There's one team in the city, that fans who are criticising, other fans who are criticising Newcastle fans for being owned by a dictatorship are jealous. And we say outside the bubble, that's not true. Fans outside of Newcastle are genuinely worried about the future of football. And it's not normal that our football clubs, which came from the people, should be owned by nation states. It's putting football fans in a terrible position. So 2 out of 20 Premier League clubs are owned by states, and they shouldn't own. States shouldn't own football clubs. And so we realise in our journey, it's not just about the human rights. It's not just about the democratic question of silencing the press and silencing local politicians. It's also about the future of football, and that's why we think that this mission statement, which Jamie's already mentioned, I think Gerard is going to speak more on it, is important. And I think we could be optimistic that if we can take this discussion to thousands and thousands of football fans, we can actually have an effect. We can actually do something. So, thanks everyone for coming. And, I'm looking forward to hear the other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, John. That's well put. Really, really interesting side on that as well. And of course, the other people who are being detained as well in Saudi Arabia, and obviously your club, your beloved club, is being used as the flagship model to see how it goes. Should we test the waters of another potential multi-club ownership and diverge into football? So thank you, John. And I'll put a link, obviously, to Newcastle Fans Against Sportswashing in the chat below. But so moving on to speakers, Gerard Arink is up next. Part of the Pro 2 Foundation. He's going to speak more, as John had said there, about the mission statement. But he's going to talk about Qatar and the lessons learned from that World Cup a year on. It's nearly a year exactly since the final. So you're going to talk about Qatar 2022 and the whole Reclaim the Game vision and mission. So Gerard, when you're ready, take the floor.
I'm ready. Thank you very much, Jamie. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
First of all, thanks for inviting me and for hosting this, John and Jamie. And Stanis, thanks for the insight. And Areej, thank you for your very impressive and emotional story. My name is Gerard Arink, but it's a difficult pronunciation, so it's Gerald for most people. I'm working as a volunteer for a foundation in Nepal over the past 15 years. And some 2.5 years ago, I started the Pro 2 Foundation, where we focused on helping the Nepali migrants who work abroad. In Nepal, there are some between 4 and 5 million people who work abroad to make some kind of money. A lot of them are working in the Middle East. And I came into contact with people who worked in Qatar. It's over 400,000. And leading up to the World Cup in Qatar, I did some initiatives with our foundation in the Netherlands to make their story heard and to improve their situation. And because of that, I was involved in the discussion in the Netherlands about Qatar and the World Cup. And I've learned some lessons. And last few months, I hooked up with another team in the Netherlands called Nooit Meer Qatar. It's Never Again Qatar. So we are putting again our strength together to see what we can do leading up to the 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia. So I would like to share with you the lessons I learned from my experience over the past 2.5 years, the Qatar World Cup, and also share some thoughts what I think the lessons we can draw from that leading up to the 2034 World Cup. I see 5 lessons to be learned from the 2022 World Cup. And the first lesson is that Qatar and FIFA, in my opinion, have won. It's a painful lesson, but it's a truth. Everything that FIFA and Qatar wanted for this World Cup, they achieved. They had a perfectly organized tournament. There were no incidents, great matches, a dream champion for them, and Qatar now is on the world map. And their strategy has worked, and that of the opponents did not. So I think we need a different strategy if we want to change anything towards the 2034 World Cup. And secondly, I think we need a different mindset, another way of thinking. And I think the most important lesson that we can draw from the 2010 awarding to Qatar is when it comes to money and power in football, everything is possible, even the unthinkable. If you think that something surely will not happen, you're 1-0 behind. Everything that seems impossible can and will happen in football nowadays. For example, we have to assume that Infantino will be appointed for life, or that the rules of the game will change to whoever wants to pay for it, or that the World Cup will forever be held in Saudi Arabia. We have to think the unthinkable. And thirdly, no one has any influence on what happens in countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia, other than the rulers there themselves. Anyone from outside who tries to change something in these countries will fail, or they play into the hands of these regimes. They will join the discussion, make promises on paper, delay the process, and ultimately only do what they think they want to happen. Maintaining a dialogue, thinking that you're negotiating, I think it's useless because you have nothing to negotiate with. And in the end, your dialogue becomes an obstacle or even an excuse for protest. And fourth, time was in favor of Qatar and FIFA. The discussion on human rights and migrant workers only started in 2021. The Human Rights Organization indicated that the greatest suffering had already been behind us, and so a boycott was useless. This was fuel to the policy of non-boycotting and trying to improve matters through dialogue. And this played perfectly into the hands of FIFA and Qatar. During the dialogue, nothing happened against their wishes, and they could postpone everything until the start of the World Cup. And then all the focus turned on the tournament itself. And fifth, there was no focus or unity in the opposing of the World Cup. Not between the different countries opposing to the Qatar World Cup, and even within the individual countries themselves, there were various topics. The media also played a role here. In the Netherlands, for instance, we first discussed about compensation for migrant workers. Then we discussed about wearing a One Love captaincy. Then whether our king should go to Qatar. And in the end, we talked about whether the fans could watch the games or go to Qatar. FIFA and Qatar relatively stayed out of the heat. And based on these lessons, I think a successful opposition against the FIFA or the 2034 World Cup in Saudi Arabia should include 5 elements. The first is unite. The second one is focus. The third is international approach. And the fourth is ignoring Saudi Arabia and FIFA. And last, we have to start now. With unite, I mean that as many of football stakeholders as possible should work together. I mean countries, fans, clubs, human rights organizations, unions, media, but perhaps also ex-players and associations. And with focus, I mean that there must be a clear goal based on a clear mission and vision. And with the right story behind us, in the end, we will win. By an international approach, I mean that the same message must be proclaimed in a lot of countries, by a lot of people, to the same target group, during club matches, but also during international matches and national games. Ignore Saudi Arabia and FIFA is perhaps the most important element for a successful strategy. I think we should not waste any energy in things we cannot influence. And there's a second insight why I think this element could be of decisive importance. From a purely football perspective, Saudi Arabia is just a location for a football tournament, and FIFA is just an organizing body. Thousands of football matches around the world are played each day without involvement of FIFA and Saudi Arabia. Let's focus on what we can influence. Let's organize a football tournament ourselves in the summer of 2034. And let's reinvent the World Cup. And let's reinvent FIFA. Let's reclaim our game. And last but not least, we have to start now. This means tonight. An advantage compared to the 2022 World Cup is that we have over more than 10 years for opposition. The first step has already been given by the fans of Newcastle United. They sought cooperation with other fans, other countries, sportswashing experts and human rights organizations. And then Reclaim the Game was born. And I think we have a clear vision and purpose. Today's football has lost its credibility and its integrity. FIFA's awarding of the 2034 World Cup is proof of this. For many fans, football is a very important part of their lives. And in my view, football should therefore reflect those values that fans strive for in their personal life, like integrity, honesty, and equality. And in addition, fans should have an important voice in the ownership of clubs, national associations, and global representation. Sponsors, money, and power are just a means to improve and innovate the game, and it's not a goal in itself, like it is right now. Football needs a reset, back to square one. And who can best take the initiative for this than the biggest lovers of the game, the fans? They reclaim their game. This is our vision and a mission statement, and we pursue 4 goals with it. The first one is that statutes and legislation of clubs, countries and associations must demand that countries cannot become owners of a club, and that fans always have some kind of an important voice in the ownership of a club. Secondly, we have to boycott the FIFA World Cup 2034 by at least 4 countries that have reached, let's say, the past 16 in one of the past 4 World Cups. And thirdly, we have to organize an alternative football global cup in the summer of 2024 with at least 4 countries. And fourth, establish a kind of alternative organization for regulating global football with fans and democracy as a starting point. And as a strategy, it's clear, and it consists of 4 ingredients: unite, apply pressure, have some endurance, and a call to join. We have to unite fans, media, human rights organizations, players, companies, etc. And we have to apply pressure on national associations, clubs, and companies, and on governments that they have to stop investing public money in FIFA events. And I think we have to start right now. Thanks very much for so far. Back to you, John or Jamie.
Gerard, thank you very much for that. I do apologise for butchering the pronunciation of your name there. I do apologise on that.
No
thank
problem.
you very much for making some excellent points there. And I remember you referencing the Qatar World Cup being given and how quickly in that documentary on Netflix that the mood changed all of a sudden with those secret back payments and secret meetings and Australia looking to put in their own bid for the World Cup and then all of a sudden realising that it's not really worth their time and effort because it's already been decided anyway, hasn't it? And of course, supporters and true fans and any lovers of the game are the ones to kickstart everything now. So once again, thank you much for speaking. I'm going to put your link to your work in the comments down below as well. Thank you very much, Gerard. So next we've got Elise, I hope it's Elise or Elise, who is a dissident from Saudi Arabia and a female women's rights activist, Elise Evans Martin. So she's going to have a speak now on women's rights in Saudi Arabia and much, much more than that. So Elise, please have the floor.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Or
it should be good. You sound great.
Yes, we can hear.
Areej, I really want to say sorry about your brother. And Areej is right. It happens so often, and it's not very common for these things to be reported. And people in the West don't understand how often these things happen and how terrible it is on the ground. The situation on the ground is very grim and it's very scary because it's being covered up, whitewashed, pushed aside, and repackaged. So the princess came out and said that male guardianship is ended. Women can now open a bank account and I can drive a car and I can go where I want. But then she didn't say the ifs or the buts. Here's the ifs or the buts. The ifs or the buts is there's still a disobedience law. So I could say to my father, I don't want to go to college, and I could go get a job as a shopkeeper and he could report me as being disobedient and I could go to a prison and be tortured until I decided to be obedient. That's women's situation. The personal status law repackaged male guardianship and did worse than that. It codified it. It codified it and put it into practice. When people like Manal al-Sharif and Lujain drove a car, if you looked at the legal context, there was no law restricting women from driving, but in practice, women weren't allowed to drive, so they didn't let them. But if you argued it legally from a legal standpoint, women could have driven. This is why you saw Lujain and Manal do it. So what they did was they got rid of male guardianship in words, and they codified it in the personal status law, which was released on International Women's Day. And the worst part is that it was not even put together by a single woman. No single woman had any involvement in writing a law that affects women directly. That's messed up. What I want to close with is that we do have power. The fans have power. I want you to look at the fact that MBS was set to visit the UK after he bought the Newcastle team in August. He didn't come because of the protests. They won't say that in the media, but that's the truth. He's afraid. Every dictator is afraid. And it's our job to keep doing the movement, and movement creates friction, and friction creates fire. And that's the fire that we want. He was set to come in August. He didn't come. Then he said he was coming at the end of the year, and he didn't come. So now they're saying he's coming at the beginning of next year. And if we keep moving, he's not going to come. He wants to live. He wants to keep doing what he's doing. And he's probably the worst ruler we've ever had in the Middle East, because there have been more executions that I've ever seen. And honestly, it's a lot to handle, even from where I am. And I really urge anyone who has these situations, if you're in a situation where you're in a position where you can speak, you should speak, because silence is not helping any of us. And I know it's hard because they don't just go after us, they go after our families, they go after your cousins. My Saudi uncle disappeared when I was 6, and I never found out what happened to him, and nobody would speak about it. And people just don't come back. The torture is real. The women's rights violations are real. The execution of minors is real. And the problem is that a lot of the media and the West don't know that it's real, or they don't believe that it's real, because all they see are these social media influencers saying, come to Saudi. I'm a full-fledged American citizen born on American soil, and I grew up as a Saudi girl, and I had no rights. I couldn't leave. Even when I went to the airport, the immigration officer looked at me and laughed and told me I'm not going anywhere until my father says so. My father, who's not actually my father, he's my stepfather. Now, if they can do that to me, who wants to go to a World Cup in Saudi Arabia? Anyways, I'm going to turn it back over to you, John.
Elise, thank you very much for speaking that very, very powerful segment there on the realities of life in a dictatorship. We all say it, but there's obviously harrowing scenes. We mentioned minors, families and relatives that go away and don't come back, and the most, I guess, closest still shut off nation that the West has any real idea on is North Korea, right? You hear all these things and there's a relative idea of what goes on there, but we don't really know. And like you say, Saudi Arabia is, they're opening themselves up to the world. MBS is looking to branch out on these deals, and he wants to get involved in sport. He wants to shed the brand of, say, Visit Saudi Arabia. He's got famous footballers on board now. The friendly smiley faces to encourage you to go. It's all fine, but the realities of you can't even leave a country that you just want to go. And you need a man's approval is just totally grim in the year that we're in. So, Elise, thank you much for sharing that story. That's powerful, and it's just totally grim, isn't it? Really, let's be honest about it. But up next we have Rasmus, and he is going to be another European-wide activist on human rights. I'm sorry, let me just get where I'm going. And he's a Brøndby fan. That's it. Most importantly, Brøndby IF fan. So you're going to speak from the Swedish perspective of how supporters see the game. So Rasmus, whenever you're ready, mate, take it away.
Thank you. It's Danish, not Swedish, but it's okay, man.
I knew that as well. Silly me. Do apologise.
All is good. Well, I want to start off with it has been heartbreaking to hear some of the stories. It's crazy that a game of football, which we all love, have come to this. And I want to start off with explaining who I am. I'm a passionate football fan with a deep love for the game. I've been involved in mobilizing fans, taking actions against issues in football, have even gone viral on social media and made appearances in national news for my activism. My focus is on preserving the integrity and values of football, opposing state ownership of clubs, and advocating for more fan involvement in decision-making processes. I believe that football should be a sport driven by fans, and I actively work towards that goal. The World Cup is, for me, a time in which the world feels connected. It is a reminder that despite our differences, we all share a common love for the beautiful game. The World Cup, and maybe football as we know it, is now dead and gone. So today we gather here to take a powerful step towards restoring football to what it should be. For years, we've witnessed corruption, abuse of power, and a lack of transparency in the international football governing bodies and on national levels. So enough is enough. Football is more than just a game. It's a part of our identity, our community, and our passion. But instead of seeing the sport flourish and thrive, we've seen it tarnished by greed and self-serving decision makers. It's time for us, the fans, to claim our rightful place at the table. We're the ones who love the game the most, who fill the stadiums, who create the atmosphere, and it's high time we have a voice in the decision-making process. So we must work together as a united force and demand change. We must push for increased fan representation in football's governing bodies. We must ensure that our concerns, values, and passion are part of the decisions being made. It is a disgrace, an absolute travesty that Saudi Arabia is awarded the World Cup in 2034. We must not turn a blind eye to this gross betrayal of football's values. As fans, we've invested our hearts and souls into this beautiful game. We've cheered for our teams through thick and thin, celebrated victories, and endured the heartaches of defeat. Football represents the values we hold dear: fairness, equality, and love. Yet, the decision to host the World Cup in Saudi Arabia spits in the face of these principles. We're talking about a country that has a long history of human rights abuses, where the kafala system continues to enslave and exploit countless individuals. It's a nation known for its oppressive regime, silencing dissent and stifling any glimmer of freedom. How can we, as lovers of this game, stand idly by and allow our sport to be tarnished by such associations? So we cannot let corrupt leaders and self-serving decision makers continue to control our cherished game. No more empty promises, no more compromises. It's time to unite, to reclaim the game, and bring it back to where it rightfully belongs, in the hands of the fans. So please join us on this journey to restore integrity, fairness, and human dignity to football. Together, I believe we can make a difference. In Denmark, a letter has just been sent to our Minister of Culture. The letter expresses curiosity about the politicians' recent meeting with the European Club Association, chaired by Nasser Al-Khelaifi, raising concerns about the ECA's influence on European football and the potential threat to small clubs. It questions whether the politician conveyed a clear stance on protecting Danish sports values and the Danish model of governance, particularly regarding the Qatar World Cup, UEFA and FIFA's governance, and the issue of corruption in international football. And this letter actually also highlights the absence of effective regulations for ownership of professional football clubs in Denmark, emphasizing the need for political intervention. I think political intervention is one of the best tools we have besides a collective effort. The necessity of this collective effort cannot be overstated. We have witnessed a long history of issues within the football governing bodies, from corruption scandals to human rights violations. So as passionate fans who adore the game, it's our duty to hold these organizations accountable and ensure that the sport we love reflects our values. The World Cup should symbolize integrity, fairness, and inclusivity, not serve as a platform for regimes with questionable records. By getting organized and raising our voices, we can challenge this decision, shed light on the issues surrounding Saudi Arabia's hosting, and demand change. It's time to reclaim the game, putting it back where it belongs, in the hands of us fans who truly care about its future. Together, we can make a difference and preserve the beautiful spirit of football. Please join us, help us, and spread the word. Thank you so much, and yeah, let's get started changing the game.
Thank you, Rasmus. Excellently said. That is the most important things. We've got to start now, right? And we have 11 years, particularly with Saudi Arabia, but in terms of ownership, being supporters, and the game that is evolving in certainly the wrong direction. No, absolutely well said, well put, and like you say, there's no time for complacency. Let's start now. Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers. They've been absolutely delightful, insightful, obviously ranging from absolutely heartbreaking stories from Elise and Areej, and our thoughts obviously with you, and any support that we need there, we'll obviously give it to you guys. And as say Rasmus, Gerard, and Stanis with some brilliantly insightful thoughts there, and obviously John being Newcastle United supporter. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up there for tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure and at times an actual honour to hear from you guys speak from your stories. So thank you to all of our speakers today, Elise, Areej, Rasmus, Gerard, and Stanis, wherever he's gone. I can't see on my screen. And of course, Phil, Liam, and so I've got your name there, Cabra for joining in. And of course, John, host on this space. It won't be the last one. There will be more to come. And hopefully we can grab more of you tonight. We do value anyone who's joined and listened tonight and asked questions and taken part. And as I say, to our wonderful speakers, thank you so much. So keep a close eye on, most importantly, the Reclaim the Game, the petition. I'll link it again in the chat there. So please do sign it and keep following all the pages from all our wonderful speakers. So from us, it's going to be a good night tonight, wherever you are, or good morning, wherever you guys are in the world. So yeah, stay tuned. There's going to be plenty more to come from us. And if anyone's got any final goodbyes, I'll hand it over to them.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.